Hello friends, thank you for watching this video. I am Mohamad and today we're going to be discussing a new feature that has been introduced with dotnet 7, which is rate limiting. We're going to be seeing how we can actually implement different rate limiting policies, how we can actually implement them inside our controller on an action level. We're going to be going through how do they work, when do we need every one of them, and how do they actually function in the background. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. It will really help the channel. As well, if you'd like to support me, please consider supporting me on Patreon or buying me a coffee. Now, grab your cup of coffee and let's get started. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we are on the latest version of our .NET SDK, which is going to be .NET 7. So in order for us to utilize rate limiting, we need to be at least on version 7 of the .NET SDK, because basically this functionality has been introduced built into the .NET SDK with version 7. So in order for us to check what's the version of the .NET SDK that we have, inside our terminal we're going to put .NET --version, and here as you can see I'm on version 7.0.202, which is going to be the latest version of the .NET SDK by the time of this recording. So as long as the version is above than 7, that should be fine. Even if it's 7.00, that should be completely fine. So once we have done that, now we're going to be creating our application. And I'm going to give it a name. Perfect. And now I'm going to go to it. And I'm going to open it in my Visual Studio Code. Perfect. So now that my application is open inside my Visual Studio Code, all I'm going to do first is just I'm going to open my terminal. I'm going to make this a bit bigger. And all I'm going to be doing here, just build my application first. Okay, great. So now once we have done that, let's start first by adding our first type of rate limiting to our application. So before we can actually write the code, let us understand how a rate limiter works for a fixed window. So let me zoom in a bit on this. Let's make it 300. Oops. Okay. So for the fixed window rate limiting, let's take this example. So first of all, let me check if this looks good first. Okay, great. So what we have here is, let's say this is our timeline of our application, and this is, for example, our API endpoint. So here I'm going to just add a new text. I'm going to say this is my API endpoint. And here, this is the timeline. So this is all of this is an API API endpoint. And what I have here is basically a timeline within 5 seconds of all of the requests which is coming in. So basically a fixed window, it means that within a certain amount of time, in this case I have 5 seconds, I have only a certain amount of requests which I can accept inside my application, which means that within this certain amount of time that I have here, I can only accept 5 requests. So within 5 seconds, I can only accept 5 requests. If any other requests comes in, it's going to basically go to a queue. And within this queue, all of these requests, they're going to be basically built in above. So as we can see here, for example, we can start with these, and all of a sudden I have a new request. I have already 5 requests in the queue. So how would this work? Another basically request will come in, and it's going to basically come here and fill the queue, and so on and so forth. So the more requests that I'm going to have coming in, the more requests is going to come into the queue. So once this 5 seconds actually finishes, so what's going to happen now? So let's just copy these so we can illustrate how this will work. So now because this has finished, what's going to happen here is I'm going to take 5 new requests from the queue. I can define how the requests from how can I pull information out of the queue. It could be like the newest first or the oldest first which comes out. I can do this within my configuration, but it's always do the oldest first. So then I have, for example, these 5 requests will come in, and these were going to be processed in the next 5 seconds. And then basically here, what's going to happen is now I have my queue empty, and the latest request was came here is going to come on top, which means that it's going to be executed within the next 5 seconds. And here we can see that within a fixed window, I can only execute certain amount of time, certain amount of requests within a fixed amount of time. But this can cause some problems, because basically as well, although it limits the amount of requests, but what can happen? Something like this can happen. So for example, within the first second, I can have these 5 requests coming in simultaneously, and basically my API will sit idle for the next 4 seconds until the request before it can get. So that's something to keep in mind when you're utilizing fixed window. So this will not protect me from burst amount of requests which is coming in. It will only basically give me the limitation of handling a certain amount of requests within a certain time frame. So this is the fixed window rate limiter. So in order for us to implement this, let's go back to our Visual Studio Code, and let's open up first of all our program.cs. And inside our program.cs, before we can actually build our application, we're going to be adding the configuration here. So we're going to be saying first builder.services.add rate limiter. We can see it's automatically built into our .NET SDK, because as we said, this is an automatically new functionality that has been added with version 7. And then once I have added this, now we need to specify the options, and it's going to be something like this. So first thing that I want to provide here is what type of rate limiters I want to implement. And all I'm going to say here is add fixed window limiter. Let's fix this reference. And now here I'm going to give it the actual name of my policy, because basically every policy for rate limiter, it could have a name. So for example, what we can do is for a certain controller, I can assign one policy. For a different controller, I can assign a different policy. For a third controller, I can assign different policy. So there's no like different or a preset of policies, or I need to utilize this and not that. It's completely up to me. And that's why I need to actually refer to every rate limiter policy by name, so I can refer to it whenever I need to. So now that I have added my fixed window limiter here, what I can do, I just can give it a name. I'm just going to call it fixed window policy. And then I need to start providing the options of how this will work. And here we can see that, let me put the semicolon here. And here we can see within the options, I can actually add whatever information that I want. And the first one is going to be the window, and this is going to be what is the amount of time that I want to request. I want to allow for the request to come in. I'm just going to say time span from seconds, and I'm going to basically make it as 5 seconds as we saw in the example. So the window here, it refers to this amount. So this, for example, we can say this is the window of 5 seconds, and this is going to be the window where I'm able to actually accept request. So once we have defined this, the next item is I want to define how many requests I'm going to permit. So the permit limit, I can say, for example, it's going to be 5 requests, or let's say 3 requests. I can do whatever I want, but for to make it consistent, it's going to be 5. So 5 requests within this 5 seconds. So this is going to be the permit limit, and then I'm going to request the queue limit, which is going to allow me how many requests which is going to stay in the queue. I'm just going to say 10. So here we can see this is the queue. So it means that once the queue is full, so let's say I have one, let's make this a bit smaller so we can fit 10 here. So we put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So once my queue has 10, any new request which try to comes in, let's say I have a new request right now which try to comes in, what happened here for this request is going to be completely rejected, and it's going to be basically not be accepted to the queue. So the user is going to receive this too many requests, and they're not going to be able to do anything with it. So here we can see that when I specify the queue size. Basically, I'm saying how many requests it can be set on side until my window is finished and I can accept a new request. And here we're just going to put 10. And lastly, I'm going to specify here right now the queue processing order. And here we can see the queue processing order, how I want to extract the message from the queue. Do I want first in, first out, or want last in, first out? So it's either FIFO or LIFO, first in, first out, or last in, first out. And here I'm just going to say queue processing order dot, I'm just going to say oldest first, because it's always good to basically extract the oldest messages first. So this is going to be my first implementation for my rate limiter. So once I always add my rate limiter, I always need to basically enable it inside my services. So once I do this, I'm just going to put app.use rate limiter, and now basically my application is able to utilize the rate limiter just because I have added this here. And now once I want to do this, I'm just going to put .NET build just to make sure that my application is still building as it should. Perfect. And now, for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to utilize this built-in controller that's been provided for us. And in order for me to add the rate limiter, I can add it basically on a controller level, and I can add it on an action level. So if I want to add it on a controller level, what I can do here is I need to add an attribute. And if you don't really, if you're not familiar with an attribute, basically the attribute is basically like another filtration process that executes prior to the request coming into the actual controller or the action. So I have a different video which I have covered the attribute in much more details and how you can create your own custom attribute. If you want to learn more about them, I'll put the link in the description down below, or I'm going to be linking it here somewhere where you can actually view that. So, but for now, we're going to just basically go with the assumption that you know what attributes are. So here what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be adding a new attribute, and basically I want to add the rate limiter on the controller itself. So I'm just going to say enable rate limiting, and then I'm going to specify the policy name, and this policy name is whatever we have gave the policy here, and this in this case is going to be the fixed window policy. And I'm just going to paste it here, and let me fix this reference. ASP.NET Core rate limiting. So let's add it manually because Visual Studio Code does not want to add it. .ASP.NET Core .rate limiting. Okay. Now that I have added this, basically right now my request here is going to be within the rate limiter. So another item that I would like to add to this one, just to make sure that I'm being covered, is I want to specify what happened, which is in this case here, if what happened to the request which is going to come in after my queue is finished. And for this, I'm going to just add it after my rate limiting options, and all I'm going to be saying here is dot I think I should add it here, not here. Wait a second. Yeah, the rejection status code, I'm just going to say it's going to be equal to 429. And basically the 429 status code is going to be too many requests. And that's basically if I try to implement, if I try to do more requests, anyone who's basically calling my API after the queue is full, they're going to be getting a 429, which stands for too many requests coming in, which is going to know that the API cannot handle any incoming requests. They have to implement some kind of retry policy from their side. So now that I have implemented this, now let's run our application. And let me copy this. Let's go back to my web browser. And here I'm just going to put swagger /index.html. And basically this is going to be my sample API endpoint. And if I execute this, try it out, I'm just going to click a lot of time. You can see after I click out of time, now it's going to be waiting because basically it went to the queue and I got the response. But again, I'm going to keep on executing, and we can see after a certain amount of time, when the queue is finished, it stops executing, it adds it to the queue, so on and so forth. And now let's try again by trying to add it a lot of time as well. Okay, perfect. Now in order for us to see that error message, what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna come back here, I'm gonna stop this, and I'm just gonna make sure the queue limit is 1 and the permit limit is 1, and now I should be able to receive. I'm just gonna increase this to 10, just so we're able to see that thing in action. So now if I come back here and click on execute, we can see that my application is not accepting any more requests. And if I have a copy of this, that's opened in a different tab. And let's make sure it's ready so we can switch directly between them. So right now I got it. Let's click on execute, and I come here and click on execute. We can see that my application is not accepting any more requests, and we're not able to until my 10-second time span has been completed, because it's being added to it. And now I got my request after that 10-second time span. So this is basically the time window rate limited that I can implement. So the next item which we're going to be covering right now, it's going to be the sliding window. And let's zoom out a bit so we can see what is the sliding window. And the sliding window is going to be a bit similar to the fixed window that we have went previously. So here we can see this is the fixed window, and we can see that we have a timeline and we have requests coming in. The sliding window is going to be a bit similar to this, but the main difference with the sliding window and the fixed window is basically once we have a certain amount of request has been executed, basically the rate limiting window is being extended for a certain amount of time to compensate for those one who has been completed, and then we can accept a new request based on that. So here we can see, for example, that for this certain amount of time I have these requests coming in, and basically right now I can only accept 4 requests. So let's say this one has been completed. In the sliding window, what happens, basically my request time window is being extended, and we can basically take upcoming new requests. So we can see right now that this has been completed, so we can make this as blue, for example. And in order for us to, let's make it back, and let's see the understanding of this. So let's make these, let's say, okay, let's make these yellow. Actually, we don't need these yellow right now. Let's make these the rest yellow, okay, and make this yellow as well. So right now what happened, let's say we have these 4 requests and it has been executed. So, and now the first one has been completed. So a standing window is basically going to come back here, and basically now we can see that we have a new request. This one is going to be completed, so we're going to make it like this, and this is going to be basically accepted in order for it to be processed. And let's find the right green. And now it's going to basically process this. So once that has been processed successfully, what's going to happen? Once this has been processed successfully, again, what's going to happen? This is going to be turned into, like, we're going to stop this, and then the request is going to come to the next one. And these, for example, now they're going to become available for them, or this one was already available for execution. And this is going to be available for execution, and now basically we can see it's moving one by one. And now this has been completed. It's going to slide to the next one, and then here this is going to be completed, and basically this one now is going to become available for it to be executed. And this is what's happening with the sliding window. It's basically slides in order for it to continue the execution. So it means that once one of them is finished, it does not fully stop the processing. It just accepts one and it continues processing. So we can see, although this has completed, we can see these 3 are still in the pipeline, and we can see that they still propagate within that sliding window until they have completed processing. And then once they complete the processing, new items will come in. So now let's see how we can implement this. So it's going to be also pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to add this the sliding window here, and basically we're just going to say builder.services.add rate limiting. Again, we have already added this before, but because we're going to introduce a new policy, we can add as many as we want. And basically what I can do here is similar to what we have done before, options. Let's put a semicolon, and then I'm gonna put here the options dot, options, it's option. And basically I'm gonna say add sliding window rate limiter. We can see it automatically detected it. And then here I'm just gonna give it a policy name. I'm just gonna say sliding window policy. And then I'm gonna put my options here for that. Let's close it. And the first thing is gonna be basically similar to what is the window time window that I want. And I'm just gonna say here it's gonna be similar to what we have done before. It's gonna be, let's say, 5 seconds or 10 seconds time span, from seconds. I'm just gonna make it at 10. Then I'm gonna put options dot how many items I wanna permit. So I'm just gonna say I'm gonna permit 5, or in our case it was 4, so let's just say 4. And then I'm gonna say what's the queue limit that I wanna do, and in this case I wanna say 3. And then once I do this, I wanna say the processing order of the queue, and it's gonna be equal, so queue processing order, and I'm gonna say order first. And lastly, I'm gonna say the segment of the sliding window. I'm gonna say it's gonna be equal to 3. So the window, as we already seen, is gonna be this one here, the blue thing, which is gonna be moving from one to another. The permit limit is how many requests I wanna permit inside the sliding window, and as we can see, it's 4. The queue limit is gonna be similar to this similar queue that we had here, is how many queues is gonna be in the request. But for simplicity's sake, I just made it in this format just so we can see how it moves from one to another. The queue processing order is going to be always the oldest first, because these came in and these are the most recent one. It's going to process the oldest first. And the segment per window, here we're going to see it's going to be processing 3, and then it's going to jump from 1 to 1 to 1. So once I have done this, also let's add the rejection status equal 4 to 9. And then this means as well too many requests if I'm not able to achieve this within a certain amount of time. And let's say I want to implement this on a certain action. So if I go back to my weather controller, so as we can see here that I have implemented the fixed window policy for my entire controller. But the nice thing about having a as an attribute my rate limitation is basically I can override it for certain actions. So if I create a custom action right now, which basically gonna say let's say it's gonna print out certain amount of text, I can basically attach for that specific action my rate limiting policy. It will basically override the one that the controller had. And here we can see that the flexibility that I don't have to really basically obey the main controller rate policy. I can just basically specify a certain one of them, and basically from there I can really be implemented. So in this case, I'm gonna create a action. I'm just gonna attach to that action. It should be automatically work from there. So what I'm gonna be doing here, oops, just gonna copy this. So let us just copy this, creating our other action, and let's update this. So I want this to be like this. So let's take this out and let's give it a route, and let us just remove this unnecessary code here. Okay, perfect. And now this one here, let's do the same thing. It's gonna remove all of this, actually just move all of it. Let's create a route. I'm just gonna give it get name. Let's change this to action results. I'm just gonna call it get name, and instead of returning all of this, I'm just gonna put OK and say hello. Let us just do a .NET build to make sure everything is building. .NET run to make sure it's running. And let's go back here and let's refresh. Perfect. Now we can see that we have both. So if I execute this, I should be able to get hello, and here I should be able to get my normal weather as before. Perfect. So now what I want to do right now is I just want to implement my rate limiting on the second action. So I'm just gonna copy this. I'm gonna implement it here. And instead of utilizing the rate limiting that I have just created, the fixed window, I'm gonna utilizing my sliding window policy. And now here within this, I can see that implementing the sliding window policy will automatically work for me here, because basically I gave it as a parameter. Let's go back, sorry, to VS Code, and basically I took the policy name and implemented as a parameter. Now for this method, it's gonna utilize this. So if I stop my application, run it again, go back to my web browser, let's do another refresh, and if I come here, try it out, execute, we got it, execute, we got it, execute. I think it's gonna be a 10 seconds, and then we're able to get it. And if we go back to the weather forecast, it's gonna basically implement the other rate limiting policy. Okay, perfect. So now that we have covered the main two, the first two actually, of the rate limiting policy, which is going to be the fixed window and the sliding window. Now let us discuss another one, which is going to be the concurrent execution of rate limiting. So basically, there's going to be four main types of rate policies that we're going to be discussing. So we have already covered the first two, which is going to be the fixed window and the sliding window. The concurrency one, it's basically a bit more advanced, where basically we are allowing people to do concurrent requests on our data, on our API, but the main thing is we are limiting those numbers of requests. So for example, we can say we are limiting a single request, a single user to do, let's say, 5 concurrent requests. As long as the user does not exceed those 5 concurrent requests, they are able to continue. If they are exceeding it, we are basically rejecting all of those extra requests. And we can have, for example, instead of having a certain amount of requests coming in from from a certain amount of users, we can have them for like I don't know, 1,000 users. All of them can be calling our API simultaneously. That should be fine. The only limitation that we are providing here is the amount of concurrent requests which is happening. So if we take a look at this here, for example, what we can see here is we can see that within a certain amount of time, we have, for the sake of this example, I'm gonna say different users coming in and basically doing requests. So we can see here, let's say, let's copy this and just make it here. Put it like somewhere here. I'm just gonna put here user 1. This is gonna be user 2. This is gonna be user 3. This is gonna be user 4. And this is gonna be user 5. So here we can see for the first user, as long as they are less than the 5 amount requests, we are able to accept those concurrent requests. For user 2, only has 1 request as well, we are able to accept it. User 3, they have 5 concurrent requests, which is accepted, but the 6th one has been rejected because it exceeds the limit. User 4, 2 requests we're accepting. For the user 5, 5 requests accepted from the 8th concurrent one. So we can see here that the 3 basically got rejected, while on the other 5 got accepted. So now let's see how we can implement this here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to go back to my program.cs, and we're going to be adding this new concurrent policy. And the first thing that we want to do here is, again, we're going to be adding a new rate limiter service. So builder.service.add rate limiter options, and let's add the options here. And then basically the first one I'm going to add is options.add concurrency rate limiter. I'm just going to give it concurrency policy, and then I'm going to provide the options. Set opt, and now let's start providing those options. So the first one I'm going to give it is how many per limit I want to say. So I'm just going to allow, for example, 5. So here we can see inside my example I only allowed 5 requests simultaneously. and then I want to add an extra one, which is going to be the queue limit. So again, I can say the queue limit, let's say, if we go back here, what we did here is, if I put the queue limit to 0, this is what happens. But if I, for example, let's do this. If I do this, something similar to this. So if I put the queue limit to 0, this what happened. All of these requests will be rejected. But if I put a queue limit to 3, for example, so what's gonna happen? It's gonna, let's add here a queue. Let's add a queue here. And basically those requests, they're gonna go into a queue. Oops, that was a bit much. Let's go back. And these requests, instead of being rejected, if our queue is active, they're gonna go into a pending state inside our queue. And once these requests finish processing, they're gonna be basically jumping here, similar to what they were. For example, these, for example, will be completed. So the completed one, let's put them in blue. And basically these will be back in green, because basically now it's their turn to be processed, and now the line will go up one by one, for example. Something similar to this. So this means that we have removed item from the queue and we have added them here. And the way we want to configure this here, we're just gonna add how many items I want to have in the queue. I can say 5. And for example, then I want to see how do I want to process these items from the queue, and I'm just gonna say queue ordering queue processing order. I'm just gonna get, as always, oldest to first, and then I'm gonna say the reject status code, as we said, is gonna be 429. And this is my rate limiting policy for concurrency. So I can copy this, I can come here, I can update my get request here to utilize my concurrent policy. Now if I stop this and run it again, let's come back here and let's refresh this. Let's do this and try it out. And you can, as you can see, I can do concurrent request, but as soon as I hit the limit, it's going into a queue. But because it's very fast, so let's change it for a bit. Let's say my concurrent requests, I can say 1, and the queue limit is, let's say, 10. I'm not fast enough to do this, but let's put it as 10. We need a specific program which can basically keep doing all of this in a high speed. So let's try to do this. So you can see sometimes it gets stuck because the queue is finished, but because I'm not fast enough, but it means this is working. Okay, so the last types of concurrency policy that I want, let's go back to my program.cs. Actually, let's go back to my web browser. Inside here, what I want to do is I just want to cover the latest one, which is going to be one of the most interesting one, which is going to be the bucket rate limiting policy. So let's see how this will work. Let's see how this is looking. Where is that? I think I need to make this a bit smaller. Let's make this like 200. Yep, okay, that should look fine. So what happens here? So a request comes in. Whenever a request comes in from a user, we're gonna check, is there token available inside? So the main idea behind the token-based policy, before we jump into the detail of it, is we have certain amount of requests that we can allow. And this certain amount of requests that we can allow is represented via tokens. And we can think about it that we have a big bucket and we have these tokens inside these buckets. So what happens when a request comes in? A request comes in, it's gonna check, do I have tokens in my bucket? Yes. So this request will take a token of the bucket from the bucket, and basically it's gonna use this request, this token, sorry, in order when the request hit the action, it's gonna show it the token, and then it will be able to process. So here we can see that whenever we have tokens inside our bucket, we are able to do the processing of our requests. But whenever the buckets inside the token finishes, any incoming request see that there's no more tokens inside the bucket, the request is going to be directly rejected. And every amount of time, the token inside the bucket will be replenished and will be filled again, so more requests will come in. And this is the rate limiting policy. So we can say, for example, I can accept, I don't know, 100 requests. So basically I'm going to have 100 tokens. And basically this within, like, let's say 5 minutes. So it's going to be like a first come first served basis. Whenever the request comes in, it's going to check for a token inside the bucket. Do I have a token? Yes. It's going to go and request it. If there's no more token, the request is going to be dynamically automatically rejected. And then every for example 5 minutes, the token is going to be refilled again with the bucket is going to be refilled again with token, so more requests will be able to process. And here we can see this rate limiting is a much more controlling. Basically we are allocating like a token based system for every single request, and we can see here that this have a lot of benefits when it comes to actually controlling the amount of incoming requests, making sure we are able to track every single request through these tokens, so on and so forth. So now let's go to the chart, see how it all works, and basically from there we can actually implement the code. So we can see here that the request comes in. It's going to check, is there tokens inside the bucket that we have? Yes, where there is tokens, so it's going to continue. So once it's continue, it will basically, it takes a token from the bucket, it assigns it to the request, and then it goes to processing. And we can see here that on every set of time we can add more tokens. So we can say, like, every 5 minutes we will replenish this token inside this bucket, and the amount of token inside the buckets are always going to be limited. We're not going to have an unlimited number of tokens. We can make the number big, but basically that's going to be defeating the actions, so for or defeating the benefits of it. So we can say we can put 5 tokens, 10 tokens, 50, 100, as long as we can know our application is able to handle this certain amount of requests coming in. And basically this is the main logic behind a token based implementation, because it will allow us to control the amount of requests coming in based on the amount of requests that our API is able to handle. So if we go back to our application, now let's see how we can actually implement this token based. So as we said before, we need to implement builder.services.add rate limiter. Again, we're gonna put the options. Perfect. And then here all I'm gonna put is options dot add token bucket limiter. And then I need to give it a name. I'm just gonna call it token bucket limiter. Actually, token bucket policy, I think it's better. And then now let's specify the options. Okay, so what is the first option that I want to see? So let's see options, and then I'm gonna say the token limit. I want to say, for example, what is the maximum number of tokens? I'm just gonna say 4, and then I'm gonna say the queue limit. I'm gonna say there's only gonna be 2 in the queue. Again, the queue topic here, or the 2 examples, is gonna be similar to the previous one. That's why I did not really cover it. Then I'm gonna request here the processing order from my queue. It's gonna be also similar to the previous one. We're gonna say it's gonna be queue processing. I'm gonna say order first, and then I'm gonna add my replenish period. I'm gonna say that I want to replenish them every 10 seconds. So I'm gonna say time span dot from seconds, and I'm gonna add 10. And then I'm gonna specify the token period. So here we can see the specify amount of token to restore to replenish. So I'm gonna say here 4. And basically the difference between a token limit and a token period. So the token limit is how much a token we can hold inside the box, and the token period is how much tokens I want to replenish every certain amount of time. So we can say this box can hold 100 token, but every, for example, 20 seconds I want to add 20 tokens. So instead of adding 100 or the full amount, I just want to add bit by bit 20, 20, 20. And in case those 20 have not been processed by previous request, let's say only 5 out of the 20, so 15 will stay and another 20 will be added to it. So, and the last thing is, do I want to implement auto replenishment? Of course I do. It's going to be equal true. And then lastly, similar to what we have done before, I'm just gonna add my rejection status code. I'm gonna say it's gonna be 429. Perfect. So once we have done that, let's copy this. And if I wanna implement it, let's go back here to my weather controller, and I can implement it here. Again, let's see if this will run, .NET run. Let's go back to my web browser. Let's do a refresh. And let's come here, try it out, execute. We can see once the token is full, we're able to execute this. Okay, perfect. So now that we have covered all of these 4 different types of rate limiting, we can see how much more easier for us right now to implement these types of rate policy inside our application. Basically, if we do a quick recap, we basically covered 4 types of rate policy: the bucket one, the bucket rate policy, the sliding window, the fixed window, as well as the concurrency. And basically all of these have different use cases and different scenarios that we need to adhere by, and basically we need to find out which one of them will work best with our application and which one will provide us the best performance for our application. So it does not really make sense to utilize, for example, the fixed window if we're trying, for example, to prevent burst amount of requests coming in. If, for example, we have burst amount of coming in and we want to control the amount of these requests, we use concurrency. So we can see here every single one of them have a different use cases and have different scenarios. I hope this video was helpful. Please like, share, and subscribe if you found it useful. If you'd like to support me, please consider support me on Patreon or buying me a coffee. And if you have any question, please put them in the comments down below, and have a great day.